Hello, this is Atheists Talk. My name is James Zimmerman. I'm going to be your host for today. This is actually the second of two episodes that we're doing concerning Scientology. Our guest today is Chris Shelton. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you.
If you haven't seen the first part yet, I would recommend you watching that if you're on the computer, because Chris went into detail talking about the history and the current activities of Scientology and even how you can avoid being suckered into some of their slick ploys.
Exactly.
But what we want to do in this show is talk about Chris's own story as a Scientologist, as a former Scientologist. He's not one anymore. But So why don't you just give us a really brief overview of you first.
Good. Brief overview is I was involved with it for 27 years.
Okay.
From the time I was 15 years old. I was actually raised with it, but I wasn't involved with it until I was 15. I joined staff working for the church 2 years later out of high school, and I worked for the church for 25 years until a year and a half ago.
Okay. So you're a pretty recent ex-Scientologist.
Yes. And I've learned a lot about the organization and its pitfalls and scamminess, so to speak, since I got out.
Okay. So my next question was, how did you become a member? You already mentioned that your parents were involved?
Yeah, my parents were involved with it, and I was raised around it, but I had pretty cool parents, and they didn't try to force it on me.
Okay.
When I was 15 years old, I was in high school, and this was in California, and my dad said, why don't you just go check it out for yourself? So I said, okay. And I went down to the local church, which was in Santa Barbara, California, and I did their personality test, which is the thing pretty much that's their introductory thing. And you answer 200 questions, and they graph out your personality on a bunch of different traits like happy, sad, extroverted, introverted, responsible, slough off, that's these kind of things on this graph. And so here I am, and it didn't occur to me until much later that I was pretty much an open book. I was a 15-year-old high school kid who was a shy, introverted, kind of geeky guy. So I show up and I sit down in front of this beautiful blonde woman, because they always put the best-looking people on the front lines.
Sure, yeah.
And this woman takes this graph and proceeds to tell me all about myself. Well, what 15-year-old male in high school doesn't have trouble with dates, isn't introverted, doesn't, who wants more girls, right? Wants to be able to talk to girls better. So she just nailed me on all these things, and I, lacking any real ability to critically think about anything, fell for all of it, right?
Did she have any knowledge of you from your parents' involvement?
No.
No? Okay.
No, it was just the usual intro line. They don't need any prior knowledge of you in order to do this, because you give them the information.
Yeah.
It's like I said, it's very fortune teller-like, and when they're going over the personality test results with you, it's a classic case of remembering the hits and forgetting the misses. They will throw all kinds of things out at you and see what sticks.
Yeah.
And so for me, what stuck was I had communication troubles, I had a hard time getting dates, and I was shy. Well, of course I was. So they said, well, we have this communications course you can take that will handle that. And my jaw hit the floor, because the idea that I don't have to be a shy, introverted, geeky guy, and I could get girls, where do I sign up, right?
Yeah, sounded good, yeah.
So I signed up for their communications course, and that was the beginning of the line for me.
Okay. So how far was this Santa Barbara church from where you lived at the time?
Well, actually, it was about an hour and a half drive. So I went, when I signed up for classes, I went with another person who lived in the town I lived in, and we both drove down there on Mondays and Tuesday nights or something, and then we went all day Saturday.
Did you have to pay for the classes?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I borrowed the money from my parents.
And how long did the class last?
Well, I bought a series. The first thing I did was I bought 3 classes, one on communication, one on study, and one on the basics of Scientology. It was summer vacation between my sophomore and junior year, so I started on those classes, and I finished 2 of them, and then I went back to school, and I was still going down to the Scientology classes, and I continued with Scientology classes in addition to high school.
So as you're wrapping up those classes, you said your involvement continued from there, so they must get you to sign up for other classes or other activities, and that's what happened?
Oh, every single time that you finish a service in Scientology, it is expected that you will sign up for the next service that you need, right? Whatever that is, and they don't have any problem telling you what you need, and they will sign you up for it, and what they call basically selling it to you, right? What they call regging you for it, is register you for it, sign you up for it, and you pay the money. And as it goes, a gradient scale of higher and higher costs for the services. So, you might start out taking a $25 or a $50 course. I think the lowest courses they have is about $50 these days. And you do that, you get a little bit of a gain out of it, and you go, oh, that was kind of cool. And they go, yeah, it was great, wasn't it? And they pump it all up, right? And then, yeah, well, here's this next service. And you go, oh, I didn't know there was another service. Oh, yeah, absolutely, you've only just begun. And so you are then put on this path of higher and higher cost services.
So the person who first met you there when you took the survey, was she higher up, or she had just progressed further than you, and that's why she was there to greet
Well,
people?
she worked there,
Okay.
and that was her job, was to get people signed up for services right off the street. She would go out on the sidewalk and sell books to people who walked by the church. That was her job. And then if she could get a person from the street to come in and do one of these personality tests, she'd then sit down and evaluate it for them and then get them signed up for services. That was her reason for existence. And so I was just another person coming in from that, right? So that was her job, and then and she'd worked at the organization for a few years. And then after high school, I was, at this point, a Scientologist, and so then they recruited me to be on staff as a volunteer.
Okay. So then what did your duties involve then as a staff
Well,
member?
I was going to be a person who was going to run their classroom, and what they call a supervisor, a course supervisor.
Okay.
And I did that for a few years.
Is that essentially the instructor for the class? Or?
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's not really, the way their classes are run, it's more like, it's more of a self-study thing.
Okay.
Yeah, and the supervisor sort of just makes sure that you understand what you're studying. And they have a whole methodology to that.
Did you just supervise the same class or all different classes?
Different classes.
Okay.
They offer a wide variety of services, but they're all delivered in one room.
Oh, okay.
In terms of the classes. All the classes can be supervised by one guy.
I suppose if they're essentially independent study, why not? Yeah.
That's right. Because you're basically given all the materials and a dictionary and what you need for the class. Hubbard's books, maybe you'll read a couple of his books as part of the course materials, and you sit and study. And the supervisor, if you have a question about something, you go, hey, I got a question. He comes over, helps sort it out, you get back to your study. And so everybody in the room could be on a different class.
Oh, sure, yeah.
And they're all making progress. Counseling is totally different. The Scientology counseling is one-on-one.
Okay.
And that's one counselor with you going through your traumatic experiences.
Were you ever involved in that also?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I did that too. So, because you can't really progress very far in Scientology if you don't do the counseling.
Okay.
The whole thing revolves around that and moving up that grade chart, that bridge of services they have to total spiritual freedom, right? And I keep making faces about this because none of these services are really any more than common sense, right? He takes a few principles from a few other places that are pretty common sense principles, like be friendly and compassionate with others and things like that, and rolls them up into these, very pseudoscientific sounding, science sounding sort of things, and says this isn't a very exact procedure and it's very exact and very scientific. And to somebody who doesn't know science, that's how it comes across. Mm-hmm. Once you start learning critical thinking in science, you go, wait a second, this stuff doesn't make any sense. And it doesn't deliver what it promises on. But it sounds so good that you keep thinking that the next service is going to give you what they're promising. And so you and once you're invested, it's easy to keep going.
Sure.
Once I started working for the organization, the brilliance of the way Scientology works is you're still a believer. So now you're volunteering for the organization, trying to get other people to come in and be part of it. And that's what I did for many, many years. I did that for 8 years in Santa Barbara as a supervisor, and then moving up to be an executive in the organization. Then I went up and I joined what's called the Sea Organization, SEA, Sea as in ocean, Sea Organization, which is a paramilitary sort of upper echelon organization within Scientology, and they wear naval uniforms.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's a whole thing. And that's sort of the upper level Those are the guys who really run the show.
Okay. Was that also in Santa Barbara?
No, I had to move to Los Angeles for that.
You mentioned before, when we were talking about this before the show, that the Santa Barbara community was kind of struggling, like with the number of members.
Yes.
Yeah, you stayed there for 8 years,
Yes.
you said? So just real quick before we
Yeah.
move on to LA, why did you stay there so long if it was faltering or falling apart?
Well, see, the indoctrination that you get in Scientology is that if it's not succeeding or it's not working organizationally, it's because you're doing it wrong.
Oh, okay, sure.
Right? There's an inherent perfection in what Hubbard has written. What I've come to learn coming out of Scientology is that this is a cult. And a cult has very specific characteristics, and one of them is that you have a leader who can make no mistakes. And so everything he says or everything that he's written it's infallible. So you buy into that in Scientology. You buy into the infallibility of Hubbard. So if Hubbard says, if you follow my policies organizationally, the organization will expand, it will get bigger, it will get better, more people will come in. And you believe that. So the only reason why it wouldn't be growing or getting bigger is because you're not doing it right.
Okay.
It always comes back to you. And that's something about Scientology that's also cult-like, is that if there's anything wrong, it's your fault. It's not the fault of the organization. It's not the fault of Hubbard. It's you. And it's very introverting. It purposefully directs attention inward.
Okay.
And I was working very hard, along with a small group of other people, to try to make this thing go because we were true believers.
Sure.
I got to the point where I realized I wasn't doing enough at the Santa Barbara level, and that's why I willingly went down to LA and joined up with the next higher echelon, is because I wanted to do more to spread the gospel, so to speak, to more people and take a more active role.
Yeah, so let's talk about LA then. How was that different? What did you do there that was different? What made it higher up?
The Sea Organization is very difficult to describe because there isn't really anything else quite like it. It's 24/7, full-time, all day, every day. My work day went from 8:30 in the morning until midnight or later, 7 days a week.
Did you live there?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, they provide everything.
Okay.
Your food and your room and board are taken care of. Medical, all that stuff is covered. Well, medical, really, it's on the county welfare dime, but that's you don't have to worry about paying for any of that stuff. They uniform you, right? So everybody's wearing uniforms, and you have similar roles to when you're in a lower church, except now you're at a higher echelon. So I actually went from being an executive in Santa Barbara for that area to being an executive over the entire Western United States.
Oh, okay.
And I was responsible for 8 years for the classes and the counseling that was delivered in all of the Western United States churches, including all the way out here to Twin Cities.
Oh, Western United States means
west of the Mississippi.
Oh, okay. It really means this whole half, this whole 2/3. Yeah.
That's right. They've divided the world into zones. And the Western U.S. is one, the Eastern United States is another, Latin America is another.
Oh, okay. It's
right?
like Risk.
Yeah, that's exactly. Their map looks a lot like that. Australia, New Zealand, Oceania, Europe, right? Asia. So they have these zones, and the Western United States is one of them, and that's where I worked in management.
So you were the executive of the zone. Okay.
Of the delivery that was going on.
Okay.
There were other executives as well handling other aspects of the church, like the public relations or the money functions or the dissemination, the promotion.
And how many years did you hold that capacity?
I did that for 8 years. Okay. And basically I burned out.
You were based in LA the whole time?
Yes.
But that intensity kind of burnt you out.
Yeah.
So then you found yourself at the Minnesota location.
No, actually, that was
I stayed.
Okay. No, there's more.
Okay.
Because I was in the Sea Organization for a total of 95 to 2012. So what is that? 17 years. 8 of those years, the first 8 years, were in this management role.
Okay.
When you burn out really bad and you do bad things, things that violate their code, like, for example, say I can't do this job anymore, they send you to what's called the Rehabilitation Project Force, which is basically Scientology's, the Sea Organization's prison detail. And where you think it's really bad already, it gets really rough. It's called the RPF. Okay. And you can Google this, and believe me, just about everything you read on the internet about the RPF is true. It's you can't talk to anybody outside the RPF. You have most of your day is spent running around doing grueling, hard labor, and then about 5 hours of your day is spent studying Hubbard's works and, working out your issues so that they will let you back into the group. And it sounds very strange, because it is very strange, but it's just a part of it's basically you're doing penance. And I did that for 3 years, and that was rough. That was a rough go. But I finished it, and then I got accepted back into the regular Sea organization, where you only have to work from 8:30 to midnight, right?
Oh, okay, yeah.
And see, when you're on the RPF, when you're on the Rehabilitation Project Force, there's no possibility of time off, holidays. I was married. I didn't see my wife.
Oh, really?
Like, you're in prison. That's basically what it's like.
Well, what is there to stop you from just walking out the door one day?
Well, it's all up here, right?
Okay.
I mean, it's not like you're being held against your will. You have to do it voluntarily, right? There's a certain degree of against your will, but really it's all up here, right? Because you do agree to it. You agree before you go in that you deserve this harsh punishment. And it's all kind of a mental
And it's your whole world,
game.
Really. I mean, if you walk out the door, who do you walk to, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. That's a big part of it. So you could say that the Rehabilitation Project Force, the RPF, is sort of the most cult-like of the cult, right? And but you survive it, you get through it. Most people who end up there don't, and they end up getting kicked out of the church.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, they walk, they give up, they say, I can't do this anymore, and they get their walking papers and they go, right? But I was one of the hardcore, and I made it through that.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Then, So then I ended up finishing that, going back into the regular line of work. I worked on an organization that makes the books. They do all that in-house, all of the books and everything. They produce all that themselves.
Oh, okay.
So I worked in that area.
The study guides, are you talking about here?
All that stuff. Hubbard's books, all of his written works.
Okay, yeah.
All of his lectures are on CDs.
Oh, okay.
They produce all of that internally, and they don't farm any of that out. So I worked in the organization that did that. And then from there, I went out and I started doing recruitment, and I started getting people who had left Scientology kind of back into the fold.
Oh, okay.
And that's what brought me to Twin Cities. And then I worked here as part of this big program of opening up all of the new churches that they're doing called the Ideal Organizations. We call them idle morgues because they're pretty empty buildings, right? You walk into them and there's nothing going on in them. But that's just a sort of play on words, because the church calls them ideal orgs, right? So we call them idle morgues because that's what they are. But I worked on that for a few years here. I opened up the St. Paul Church here. I worked on that. And it was here, seeing how empty it was, seeing how what we were doing was really just trying to eke money out of people. And I could see that firsthand. When I was in LA, I was kind of removed from what was going on with Scientology, because I was in a central location where all of my experience with it.
Well, you were once removed from the world at large, right?
Exactly, exactly. I was very removed. So now that I was out and about, and I was in Las Vegas, Portland, Seattle, I helped work on all of these churches, and then I came here to Twin Cities, and we opened up this one, and it was not big, it was not exciting, it was not lots of new members coming in, it was just the opposite. All we were doing was trying to milk money out of the small little group of people who were here over and over and over again, and I became extremely disenchanted with that. I signed up with Scientology because I wanted to help people, and I thought I was really helping people. I thought I was doing a really good job of that for many, many years. It's what kept me going. But to see what it had devolved into firsthand, and to see that over and over again, I had to get out of it. It was just a point of my own personal integrity at that point.
So how long were you here in the Twin Cities before you concluded your relationship with Scientology?
About 2 years, two and a half years.
Just 2 years then?
Yeah,
Okay.
about two and a half years, yeah. And then I left from here, went back to LA, told them I quit, and there's a whole procedure I had to do to get out. And in December 2012, I finally finished that, and I was no longer a member of the Sea organization.
So you were willing to go through their whole procedure for leaving?
Yes. Yeah, it took 8 months.
Oh, it did?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it was not. But because I still, at that point, believed that Scientology itself still had validity.
Okay.
Even after all this time,
You
after
just
everything
didn't
I'd
think you
seen.
were cut out for being a front man for it?
Yeah,
Okay.
I didn't really feel like it was, I felt like the organization was going off the deep end, but I still felt the subject had
Sure.
validity. I've since come to find that that was not the case at all.
So can you detail more what happened during those 8 months?
Yeah, I was basically made to do labor
Okay.
because they kind of treat you sort of badly when you want to leave. You're not a popular person when that happens because they're a cult. And as a cult, they shun people who disagree with them. It's a limited form of shunning when you're still in there, but once you go, then you're really shunned. And I did, so really I just kind of did cleaning and fixing things up around the location I was in Los Angeles until I could get the procedures done that they want to do with you, which are a little hard to explain in this short format.
Okay.
To be given basically you're free to go sort of thing.
Do they know
right?
during that time period that is it a foregone conclusion that you're going to leave, or do some people do that labor again and come back in?
Yes, the whole point of dragging it out like that and making it very difficult is to convince you to stay. And various people will sit you down and try to sell you on staying. And I gave up quite a bit to leave. I was married. I divorced my wife.
Oh, okay.
I gave up my whole life, really, because I was so disenchanted with what Scientology had become. It was so clearly and obviously not what it was saying it was. And actually, I'll tell you, one key thing that actually was the deciding point for me was the day I was standing in the Twin Cities church here, and I realized that my day-to-day activities involved telling more lies than telling truth about Scientology and what we were doing. And it was the day I realized that it just hit me.
Yeah.
I had to be done with this. This wasn't what I signed up for.
We talked in part one about the numbers falling off since the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that a lot of people have asked themselves or have noticed that about themselves, and that's why they've left?
I think that's exactly why they're leaving, because it's so clearly not what it says it is,
Mm-hmm.
and it's so money-oriented. It is so heavily oriented to taking people's money. They have endless numbers of fundraisers and guys who are trying to get money out of you for all different kinds of reasons, not just so you can do classes or that you can do counseling. They just want you to donate money for the greater good of Scientology.
Does the money go to a few people who are living a life of luxury on yachts and
Yes.
fine cigars, and there's these people somewhere?
One person.
Just goes to one person?
David Miscavige.
Okay.
He's the current leader of the church and has been since the early 80s. He actually took over the control of the organization from Hubbard, kind of behind the scenes thing. It's a very long story. But he is the single person, and he is basically the dictator of Scientology.
Do you think he sincerely believes it?
No, I don't.
You mentioned that you're now divorced, so
Yes.
your former wife, was she and is she a Scientologist?
Yes.
Okay. She came with you to the Twin Cities, I assume? Oh, she did not?
No.
Okay.
Scientology has a very low value, places a very low value on family. The Sea Organization especially places the group ahead of everything.
Okay.
It did not bother anybody in the Sea Organization that I was away from my wife for the better part of those
Yeah.
3 years that I was out and about, actually 4 years. That's actually what sort of destroyed the marriage, was we were apart for so long, it basically the marriage just sort of fell apart. So that was, at that point, I'm sorry to say that was not a deciding factor for me in terms of staying or going, because my marriage had already tanked. That became very obvious to me when I was out here trying to talk to her and keep it going, and it was just falling apart. But nobody in Scientology cared about that. They just wanted me to do the work that they wanted me to do. And that was another point of disenchantment for me.
So then, we've already touched on this, that you mentioned there was some shunning, but obviously during those years you had not only a spouse, but other family and friends.
And parents.
So what's your relationship with them now? What's going on? I mean, so you left and now you have, no family and not much money to show for it?
No, here's the good news, is there are people who are in Scientology, everybody in Scientology knows about this shunning. So what a lot of Scientologists will do to avoid the shunning is they will just go silent. They don't talk about Scientology. They just sort of stop going to the church. They'll still call themselves Scientologists, but they don't do Scientology.
Because they don't want to be shunned by the people that they're genuinely friends with.
That's
or
right.
that are their own parents or spouses. Okay.
Exactly. They don't want that, what's called disconnection in Scientology. They don't call it shunning, they call it disconnection. My parents did that. They silently sort of just faded off the lines, but they didn't make a big deal about it because I worked for the organization and they didn't want to be disconnected from me. So when I got out, they were like, hallelujah, right? And they were very happy, and they said, well, we've been, we don't follow Scientology anymore. And I was like, great. And it wasn't a problem for me at that point. And
that's
then,
good,
so I have not lost my parents.
Oh, good.
However, when I moved here, I had, my marriage had ended. I had met somebody else out here, and I had come here to be with her. That's actually what got me to come back to Minneapolis after I went back out to Los Angeles.
Okay.
I came back for her. And she's a Scientologist. And when I came here, circumstances went in such a direction that I started going on the internet, finding out what Scientology was really all about. And I couldn't be honestly part of it anymore. And we had actually gotten to the point where we were going to get married, and she dumped me.
But that's dumb. Well, if you're looking
disconnected.
If you're looking for romance, there's plenty of non-Scientologists out there.
Yes, there are.
Now.
I have found that to be true.
Good. We have 2 minutes left, but I want to make sure that we have time just to mention where people can learn more about you specifically.
My blog. All of my, I have a critical thinking blog, and I have embraced critical thinking as a very, very important thing. So my blog is Minnesota Critical Thinker. It's not Minnesota Ex Scientologist.
Okay.
And it's mncriticalthinking.com.
Sure. It's better to be known for what you are rather than what you are.
Exactly.
Yes.
and I intend on doing a lot more with critical thinking because I want to expand on that.
Say the website again, real quick.
mncriticalthinking.com.
Okay, good.
Yeah, and all my story is there. And I also produce YouTube videos. I have a YouTube channel, and I discuss a lot of my experiences with Scientology, and also the thing from a critical thinking point of view. What's wrong with Scientology? I've done analyses on this, and I've done videos on this. So it's not just my own testimonials or memoirs.
It's also a critical analysis of their teachings.
Exactly, and the organization itself, and why it's a cult, why it's a scam. It's not just me sitting there going, it's bad, but here are the facts as to why, using Scientology's own literature and Hubbard's own words to show that.
Well, hopefully in a couple of years we can do another show where you talk about some of the feedback that you've received from those videos and from the blog and stuff. I suppose you're probably already accumulating some of that.
Yes, I've got thousands of views, and it's been thumbs up all around.
Yeah, we could even talk about it now, but like I said, we're out of time.
Yep.
So thank you for joining us. You
Thank
had
you.
an amazing journey, and we're glad that you're here now in the critical thinking world.
Me too.
And thank you for watching this show. This is Minnesota Atheists again, and if you are interested in us, we're interested in you. Contact us on the information that you see on the screen. We'll be happy to send you a copy of our newsletter, which details many of the activities going on within the Minnesota Atheists. Thank you again.